Jan Pearson is a sculptor. He works with steel. He's an extraordinary artist and an extraordinary person. Jan lives in Grants, New Mexico, which is in itself an extraordinary place to live. The wind has carved the limestone and sandstone into wonderful shapes. It's an inspiration to all of us who live here. The big sky encourages artists to dream big. The high desert terrain challenges the artist to look at the elemental form and structure of things. And the huge lava flows, the El Malpais, which defines this land, is considered by some to be quite impossible to deal with. But Jan Pearson is a type of man who loves and thrives on the impossible, so it's not a mystery that he should find a place to live that suits him so well. Let's meet Jan. Come in, Jan. Welcome to you and to your friend.
Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Jan, you once said that simple things don't inspire you. It's the difficult or even impossible thing that provides the adventure for you. Introduce us to this friend of yours and tell us a little bit about that difficulty and that adventure.
Okay, Peggy, this is a reconstructed buffalo skull. This portion that you see here is all natural. It was dug up at the base of a buffalo jump in Montana. It's been dated at about 300 years or older, and we know that because the Indians quit running the buffalo off the buffalo jumps after they got the horse, and that would be about 300 years ago. I had this piece sitting around for some time, feeling a sense of obligation to it because it represented a part of history. The buffalo has come to symbolize the clash of the cultures, the European culture and the Indian culture, and everyone knows that, that we destroyed the buffalo. When you look at the points of the buffalo skull, it forms an almost equilateral triangle. And the equilateral triangle has been used by many cultures to symbolize stability. And when we destroyed the buffalo, the stability of the Indian tribe was destroyed. My desire to reconstruct it is a tribute to that clash, and symbolizes an effort by many people to undo that damage or to move forward into something more positive. The steel was to the Europeans what the buffalo was to the Indians. We used it for building all kinds of implements. We built the railroads with it, and of course the building of the railroads is what led to the destruction of the buffalo.
And the work that I have here, the steel gate, is kind of a culmination of years of experience working in leather and silver. The transition, I guess, if you want to call it that, of the skills that I've acquired began, as I said, in the early 70s when I began doing leather work. The leather work gave birth to leather carving. I became fascinated with the bas-relief and the carving technique in leather. And after a few years, I couldn't see any financial rewards in sticking with leather, so I became interested in silversmithing. And in researching and reading on silversmithing, there was a technique called chasing and repoussé that intrigued me, because in the chasing and repoussé, there were techniques that were used that were very similar to what I had experienced as a leather carver. So I began doing chasing and repoussé in silversmithing. My technique in silversmithing, my style, was rather masculine in nature, and there's a limited market for men's jewelry in silversmithing. So I became interested in doing work in steel. And the technique of chasing and repoussé appealed to me, but that process is difficult to do in steel. Those of you who aren't interested in or familiar with chasing and repoussé might be interested to know that the Statue of Liberty was done using that technique, where they would carve a wooden mold and then hammer the copper into the wooden mold. There are other methods that you can use. One is a pitch bowl, and pitch is kind of like a, I don't know, a liquid or a tar in consistency. It's like a liquid vice. You can lay your copper or silver on the pitch bowl in the pitch, and when it cools it becomes solidified and it holds the silver or copper, and at the same time you can hammer on it with different drivers and sculpt the silver out, and the pitch gives way to the hammer blows. Well, you work silver, copper, and non-ferrous metals cold. Steel you have to work hot. So if you try to hammer hot steel into a mold, of course it's going to burn the mold. So I devised a technique whereby I used compressed air.
What was your first piece like?
My first piece was a commission piece. I was commissioned to make a base for a piece of sculpted turquoise. The sculpture was of an Indian looking towards the heavens. And after talking to the clients about their desire for a base, I was driving away and I had the vision of this Indian looking towards the heavens. And another vision came to me from somewhere of an eagle looking down on the Indian. And when I got home, I called the clients and I asked them, what's the name of that piece? And they said, it's Spirit Talker. So it was a perfect match. I could see that the Indian was in a sense questing for the spirit world, and so the eagle represented the spirit world. And it was that first piece that opened up a whole new panorama of abilities to sculpt in steel. The piece was a very smooth and flowing piece. You know, the wings were very stylized, and yet I wanted the belly of the eagle to be defined without leaving hammer marks. And I had sculpted the piece in a hollow fashion, so I decided that I would introduce compressed air into it and see if I couldn't blow that belly out. And that opened up a whole new concept in working with steel. It all of a sudden became possible to work steel like you work clay, to blow steel like you blow glass.
The figures like the buffalo, I start with a 1/4-inch plate, cut out the silhouette of the 1/4-inch plate, and then cut out the same silhouette in 14-gauge steel, then weld them together, and then apply the air the way that I mentioned before, making the envelope, and then what I do is I put the air here on one of the legs, and so the air comes in, pressurizes the piece, and then I use my torches to get the definition. And then also there's, I've devised an air hammer that I custom built for getting texture.
In terms of the difficulties that I came across in constructing this piece, a lot of people would assume that this was cast, but it could not be cast because if it were cast, the process of casting results in up to 20% shrinkage. And if I had 20% shrinkage here where these two pieces met, there wouldn't be a match. So it had to be done in direct metal. When you're welding in steel, you know, there's a number of seams here that you can't see. They've all been kind of polished over, but every time you weld a seam in steel, you're going to get some distortion. So the challenge was to maintain the integrity of this line here as it meets this immutable bone. So there were many braces that were up under here. If you were to take this off, you would see a lot of bracing to maintain that integrity there.
Yeah. Why did you decide to work with steel?
It was kind of a natural progression. I have always been fascinated with art, line and form, fabrication, taking ideas and trying to execute them. And I had already done extensive work in leather, silversmithing, goldsmithing, tool making, lapidary, and I just wanted to keep moving. And steel represented a way to do that, to continue to move forward in executing different ideas. I meet clients, and and I would think of a variety of things that I might be able to do for them, and I needed to add steel to that list of materials that I worked with.
If you would take a look here at the eye on the buffalo here, I blew out the face, and then where I wanted to do the eye, I took drivers and drove the drivers back in, defining the eye, the nose, the horns. The same thing with the muscle technique, or the muscle tone. I'd take and heat up this area, and it would blow this area out. And if it came out too much, then I could take hammers or drivers and push that back in. The same thing with the horse here, the different definitions. And then, of course, sometimes you have to use fill welding. So the technique that you see here, all the different textures, is a combination of the compressed air giving me my relief, using a wire feed welder, varying the speed from fast to slow, removing the protective gases that keep the weld from oxidizing. Sometimes I use that technique to get different effects, different textures. So this is basically, I guess you could trace this all the way back to my beginning days as a leather carver. And now I've applied a lot of these techniques, some of the silversmithing techniques, to metal sculpting. And what I'm doing here is, in the last stages, I'm applying some different colored oxides to get my color, so that I can separate the different features, the different plants and from the animals, and the rocks and things like that.
There are many fascinating aspects, symbolic aspects of this buffalo skull. These horns, for example, if you take them off and if you look inside, see that wire in there? That's old. See, that's telegraph wire that came from an old train line. Back from the days.
How did you obtain that, and where did...
I got this when I was living up in the telegraph wire. I got while I was living in Utah. There was a railroad line that ran through that they decided to restore, and they would run old steam locomotives over it, and it had telegraph wire laying along the side. It was just laying along. It had, the poles had long since rotted and fallen down. And so there were miles of this telegraph wire, and I just went down the track one day and just rolled it all up.
Is that part of the structure, or is that symbolic? Did you want to include it for a symbolic reason, or does it actually...
No, that was happenstance. I just happened to have that telegraph wire, and I needed to make a framework. And it just, it just was a kind of an incidental thing. Another aspect of this is the teeth. I spent a lot of time trying to think of a medium that I wanted to use for the teeth. And of course, turquoise came to mind because it symbolized, turquoise is a spiritual stone to the Indians. It was supposed to protect the wearer. It had a lot of symbolic meaning to the Indians. So I finally chose turquoise for the teeth. If you look, perhaps, well, let's see. If you look underneath, you can see how the teeth are all carved.
Yeah, and you carved those individual...
right. Using a real buffalo skull as a model and the teeth.
They're all cut out individually. The flowers are made of 5 different sections and then welded together and then shaped. And the leaves are all cut out individually. One of the things I might mention for people who might want to try this, there is a hazard. If you have oil in your line and you combine that with compressed air and then apply heat, it's possible you could end up with a bomb. So I would suggest that anybody that wants to try this, make sure they don't have any air or any oil in their airlines.
Jan, you frequently combine very unusual materials, such as with this buffalo skull. You used natural material and steel. How did that idea come to you? Is that part of, is that where you start? I want to gather material that's unusual and put them together, or does that evolve as you work with the piece?
I found that being able to work in a variety of material offered more flexibility when it came to executing ideas. Generally, when I'm speaking to a client, I form a vision in conjunction with the client's ideas. And oftentimes, being able to bring in other medium helps in creating visual dynamics and interest in a piece.
Another aspect of this question is sometimes you use material in an unusual way, and I'm thinking about the gates or your first piece where you actually blew steel, which is, to me, that's a really unique process. I had never heard of that before. So is that again the muse working for you, or is that something you think about a lot and want to find different ways to use materials? Is that part of the way you think? Or?
I think the muse aspect comes a little closer. What happens is I become committed to a vision, and I take it a step at a time. I don't always know exactly how I'm going to achieve a certain effect until I get to that point where it has to be done, and then the information comes from somewhere on how to do it.
That's a good question. Where do you get your ideas? Where does that come from?
You know, I think a lot of artists have been asked that question, and there's one answer that seems to come up frequently, and that is they don't know.
You know, a job like this is pretty challenging, and I guess that's what motivates me the most, is something challenging where it's a real sense of adventure. The way I got this commission, I was working on a sculpture of a buffalo skull. I had gotten a crown portion of a buffalo skull that was dug up at the base of a buffalo jump back when the Indians used to run buffaloes off of the cliffs, from a client that I'd done another buffalo skull for. And I was sitting there working on the buffalo skull thinking that I'd really like to have another commission come in. And this gentleman walked in with a picture of a gate with an Indian on horseback with a spear running down a buffalo. And it was just done in a two-dimensional cutout. And he said that he was interested in having a gate done, but that he wasn't really satisfied with the appearance or the style of the gate that he showed me. So we talked at length about what he wanted, and then he asked me for a price, and I gave him a price that I thought would be compatible with his level of interest in a gate. And this was the design I came up with for him.
Are you dreaming any impossible dreams right now?
Well, I have some ideas. Perhaps I can find a client that might.
Give us a little hint.
Yeah, I would like to incorporate a waterfall with a set of gates.
Oh, wow,
That's
that'd be great.
something I would like to do.
How would you describe your work?
How would I describe my work?
Yeah.
In many cases, my work is a reflection of the clients that hire me to do the work. I guess that's the best answer I can come up with.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, I'm a client of yours. What do I need to know about you?
I think what you need to know about me is, as an artist working for you, is that you don't have to worry about that aspect. What you can do is feel free to express what's in you. And if you can just feel free around me and express what's in you, then I can pick that information up and extrapolate the information that I need and then feed back to you something that I think will please you.
You're hired.
The most important thing you need to know, I think, is that you can have confidence that I will listen. I will listen to your dreams, to your ideas. And you need to keep in mind that if you can dream it, I can do it.